Hello guys, welcome back to Life Technologies channel and thank you for watching. So in our previous video we looked at how to do basic SIS configuration for an IPRAN network, where we discussed details of which details you want, which parameters you should prepare, including the system ID, how you generate the system ID from loopback 0, which network type you should be using, the point-to-point network type instead of the broadcast network, how to plan your SIS process for different rings, and even how to enable the SIS processes on interfaces. We also discussed on how to do basic troubleshooting, which commands you can use to confirm that your peering is up, you are able to learn the routes, and many other details that we covered in our previous video. So today we are now looking at part 2 of our IGP configuration, where we'll be discussing SIS cost planning and configuration on Huawei routers. So when you set up a network, we know we need to, like for IGPs, many of them, SIS or SPF, they determine the best path based on cost. So it means you need to pay attention when you are planning the cost that you'll be using in your network. You need to decide which values you'll be using between aggregation nodes, between access nodes, and between also the access and aggregation nodes. So this one should be done prior to implementation, so that you know when you are configuring the network, you know which cost you should configure. For example, you can decide to configure maybe a cost of 1,000. You can decide to do automatic calculation of cost. So all these should be put into consideration when you are setting up your network. So as you can see in the topology, we have the previous lab that we are working on, and the red ones indicate the cost that will be configured on these links. Remember, sometimes you even have low capacity links in the network, so you want your traffic to flow on the higher capacity links. Sometimes you have protection links like the microwave links, and you don't want traffic to use those links. So you need to do a proper cost planning to ensure that the traffic is using the optimal path, because SIS will use cost to determine the best path, and the lowest cost will always be preferred. So you need to ensure that your best paths have the lowest cost. And if you have low capacity link, then they should have the highest cost, so that they are not selected as the best path and cause congestion in the network. So there are different modes in which you can configure cost on Huawei routers. The first one is interface cost. So this one, you manually configure the cost on every interface. And many times this is what I've seen being used, where you manually configure the cost on each interface. So when you are setting up your node, or you are adding a new node in the network, you have to specify the cost on each and every interface that you are running SIS protocol. So as you can see in the previous topology, you can configure the cost manually on these interfaces, like between SG01 and RSG01, you configure cost of 50. So you need to configure a cost of 50 on SG01 and also a cost of 50 on RSG01, because it should be symmetric. Like if you have 50 on one end, you should also have 50 on the other end. Then your traffic flow will be symmetric. Then another mechanism is when you use the global cost. Like you configure the cost within the SIS process, and you don't have to configure the cost manually on the interfaces. So these can also be used. You just reference the cost that you want to configure, you specify it in the SIS process, then all the interfaces will be using that cost. Then another mode is you can do is automatic calculation of cost. This one is where you are calculating cost based on the interface bandwidth. And we know the default bandwidth is always 100 megabits. So you can configure this bandwidth command, bandwidth reference command, and then ISIS will be able to calculate the cost itself automatically. You don't have to do any further changes on the costing unless you want some manual configurations. So, and this bandwidth reference command can only be used when we have a cost style of wide or wide compatible. So if you have the narrow one, you won't be able to use this bandwidth reference command. And this is the formula of how ISIS will calculate the cost. So we have the interface cost will be equal to interface, the bandwidth reference value out of the interface bandwidth times 10. So yeah, you need to set the bandwidth reference value depending on the link capacities that you have in your network, and you also need to allow to accommodate the future growth of the network so that when you have higher capacity links, their cost will be lower and the links will be preferred. So if you don't configure cost at all, which means we are using the default cost. So the ISIS default cost will be 10 and the cost style will be narrow. So many times we configure the cost style to be wide, and then we use either of the method or the modes to be able to change the costing on the links or the interfaces in our network. So how do you configure? We've talked of 3 modes, and just to mention that these 3 modes are in descending order. So if you have interface cost configured, you have global cost, and then you have automatically calculated cost, the interface cost will be the preferred one. It will take effect. Then followed by global cost and then automatically calculated cost. So anytime you have manually configured the cost on an interface, that is the code that will be used in the network. Then if you don't have interface cost configured, then the second preference will be the global cost. So if you don't have global cost configured, then we will now do the automatic calculation of the cost based on the bandwidth reference. But if you haven't configured the bandwidth reference, then the default cost will be 10. So these are just the preferences of these 3 modes. So how do you configure interface cost? It's very easy. You just need to go under this interface on any router. You go into the interface that you want to make changes, and then you specify ISIS cost. So the ISIS cost we are configuring is 100. So you do ISIS cost 100 and then you commit. That is it. You will have configured a cost of 100 on this interface. So you still need to go to the peer device and then you do the same on the peer interface. Then automatic calculation, this one we said you configure it under the ISIS process. So, and we need to specify the cost style of wide, and then you can now configure the bandwidth reference. So in this case we are using 10 million as our bandwidth reference, and this one should be uniform on all the routers. You make it uniform. You don't configure 1000 on one end and then on another router you are configuring maybe 100 million or 1 million. No, you should make it uniform to 10 million on all the devices that you are configuring ISIS. And then you need to enable this auto cost enable so that the automatic calculation of cost will take effect. Then another is the global cost. This is how you configure the global cost. You just go into the ISIS process and then you specify circuit cost and then cost of 100. So this one you've configured the global cost of 100 for all the interfaces. So if we log into the routers, I will use RSG1 as an example so that let me clear my screen. So if I display ISIS interface, this is how we can check the cost on an interface. If I display ISIS interface, I need to add variables. So you can see, for example, gig 00, we have a cost of, we haven't configured any cost. So you can see that the cost is 10, which is the default cost for ISIS interfaces. even on gig 001, the cost is also 10, the default cost of ISIS. So what we can do, let me just show you the configurations. Display current configuration, configuration ISIS. You can see we don't have any cost configurations here. If I go under this interface gig 0/0/0, we display these. I also don't have any cost configuration. I haven't configured any cost manually, so we are using the default ISIS cost of 10. So let's start with the global. So for the global one, you said you need to be under ISIS 100, and then we run the circuit cost. Circuit cost, we put a value of 100. So this is the code that will be used on all the interfaces. So remember, before we checked, the cost was 10. So if I do display ISIS interface verbose, I expect to see a cost of 10 or a cost of 100 applied on all the interfaces. So you can see here gig 00 has a cost of 100. If we go to gig 001, 002 also has a cost of 100. So we have used the global cost configuration to be able to change the cost of all the interfaces. Then let me just delete that one, display ISIS 100, display these. I undo the circuit cost 100. So it should be back to 10, and then I can do the bandwidth reference so that we do the automatic calculation. Bandwidth reference, we put it at 10 million. And then I do auto cost enable. So if it display this, you can see these are the configuration. We've configure the bandwidth reference to be 10 million, and then I have the auto cost enabled. So now ISIS will calculate the cost based on this formula: bandwidth reference times interface bandwidth out times, bandwidth reference out of interface bandwidth times 10. That will be the cost on each and every interface. So if I display ISIS interface verbose, you can see now we are having a cost of 100,000. And remember, this one is a 1 G link, so we have a cost of 100,000. If you have 100 G link or 200 G link, the cost will vary depending on the link capacity. So when you are using the reference bandwidth, you really need to be keen on which the bandwidth reference to configure, so that you don't end up with links having the same cost, but they are of different capacities. So this is how you use the bandwidth reference to configure, so that you have automatic calculation of cost. So I can do, so we have, let's also simulate a scenario when you have the interface cost configured and you have the automatic calculation of cost. So if I display the ISIS interface verbose, you can see we have a cost of 100,000 on this gig 00, but then we will go ahead and configure the interface cost manually, so that we have a cost of 100 on this interface, and see which one will take effect. So I go under interface gig 0/0/0, I do ISIS cost 100, display this. We have manually configured a cost of 100. Now if I display ISIS interface gig interface verbose, we can see that now the cost configured on the interface has taken effect, because it has priority. It has a higher priority compared to the cost that is automatically calculated. So we have a cost of 100 on this interface, but if you go to gig 002, we still have a cost of 100,000. So this one proves the fact that, yeah, the manually configured cost on an interface is more preferred than the automatically calculated cost. So this is how you set the cost on your network. You have the 3 modes, just to go through them again. You have the interface cost, you have the global cost, and you have automatically calculated cost, where you configure the bandwidth reference, and then you will be able to control how you want your traffic to flow in the network. So many times we use hybrid. Many times you will find it's a hybrid network where we have the interface cost configured manually. If you have interface cost to configure manually, of course you only have one, but then you will find some networks we mix these modes. You can have the global cost configured, you can have the bandwidth reference configured, and then you can also manually configure the cost for some interfaces. So if we were to look at this network, just to see how traffic will flow. For example, we have CSG8. CSG08 has to be able to reach RSG01. So it has multiple paths that it can use. Or let's use this CSG8 to SG01. So it can flow this way to this, using this path to SG01. Or another way is it can flow all the way using the redundant path and then to SG01. So if we can clear the cost, you find that this one we have a cost of 100, 100, 100. So up here we'll have a cost of 300. And then down here we have a 100, 100, 100, 400, 450. So down here we have a cost of 450. So ISIS will always select the path with the lowest cost. So the optimal path will be via CSG01 and not via CSG02. I mean CSG03, because the upper path will be preferred due to lower cost. So yeah, you need to do a proper planning of cost in the network to ensure that the optimal path is used to forward traffic. So thank you guys for watching, and in our next video we'll be looking on how to do route import between the access and aggregation ISIS process, just so that we are able to communicate from end to end, from CSGs to the ASGs to the RSGs. And that one we need to do it, we can only achieve it via route import between the access and aggregation processes. Thank you for watching guys, and please subscribe and stay tuned for more videos on our IPRAN series. Thank you.